Picture this. You are a young woman standing in the marketplace of London on a bitter morning in 1547 AD. The cobblestones beneath your worn leather shoes are slick with frost and something far worse, the dried blood of yesterday's executions. Your breath forms small clouds in the frigid air as you clutch a loaf of bread close to your chest, purchased with coins your husband will later demand you account for down to the last farthing. Around you, the city awakens with the sounds of merchants hawking their wares, horses clattering over stone, and the distant toll of church bells calling the faithful to morning prayers. But beneath this seemingly ordinary Tudor morning lies a web of laws so twisted and cruel that your very existence as a woman is governed by statutes designed to control, punish, and destroy you at every turn. You hurry through the narrow streets, keeping your eyes downcast as you've been taught since childhood. To look directly at a man could be interpreted as brazen behavior. To speak too loudly might mark you as a scold worthy of public humiliation. Even the way you walk must be carefully measured, for laws exist that dictate how a proper woman should carry herself in public. The bread in your arms represents more than sustenance. It's evidence of your legal status as property, purchased with money that belongs not to you, but to the man who owns you, whether father or husband. In the eyes of Tudor law, you are no more capable of independent thought or action than the livestock in the fields beyond the city walls. As you navigate these treacherous streets, you pass the pillory where yesterday a woman stood locked in wooden stocks, her crime nothing more than speaking harshly to her neighbour. Her head and hands were trapped in the device, while townspeople pelted her with rotten vegetables and human waste. The law that put her there was designed specifically for women, based on the belief that female voices were inherently dangerous to social order. Today, the pillory stands empty, but its presence serves as a constant reminder of what awaits any woman who dares step outside the narrow boundaries society has drawn around her existence. Before diving into these forgotten stories of legal persecution and systematic oppression, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these dark chapters of the past together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared need to understand how far we've come and how vigilant we must remain. The Tudor period, spanning from 1485 to 1603 AD, is often romanticized in popular culture as an era of Renaissance learning, artistic achievement, and royal magnificence. We picture Henry VIII in his jewelled doublets, Elizabeth I delivering stirring speeches to her troops, and Shakespeare penning his immortal plays. But beneath this glittering surface lay a legal system so systematically hostile to women that it defies modern comprehension. These weren't accidental oversights or cultural quirks that happened to disadvantage women. They were deliberate, calculated laws designed to ensure that half the population remained in a state of legal non-existence. The doctrine of coverture formed the foundation of this legal nightmare. Under this principle, a married woman ceased to exist as a separate legal entity the moment she spoke her wedding vows. Her identity was literally covered by her husband's, making her what the law termed a feme covert. She could not own property, enter into contracts, or even control her own earnings. If she worked as a seamstress, brewer, or merchant, every penny she earned belonged automatically to her husband. If she inherited land from her father, it passed immediately to her husband's control. She became, in the cold language of the law, a piece of property herself, no different from the furniture in her home or the clothes on her back. But coverture was just the beginning. Tudor England developed an intricate web of laws specifically targeting female behavior, speech, and even thoughts. The crime of petty treason illustrates the horrifying logic of this system. If a man killed his wife, it was murder, punishable by hanging. But if a woman killed her husband, it was petty treason, equivalent to a subject murdering their king. The punishment was not the relatively quick death of hanging, but burning alive at the stake. This legal distinction wasn't based on the severity of the crime itself, but on the belief that a woman killing her husband was an act of rebellion against the natural order of the universe. The law of petty treason extended beyond murder to encompass any act of female defiance against male authority. A servant woman who struck her master could be charged with petty treason. A daughter who physically resisted her father's commands faced the same fate. The message was clear and terrifying. Women existed in a state of permanent subjugation, and any attempt to challenge that subjugation was not just criminal, but treasonous. Tudor lawmakers seemed particularly obsessed with controlling women's voices and expressions. The crime of being a common scold was defined so broadly that virtually any woman could be prosecuted under its provisions. A scold was described as a woman who disturbed the peace through her speech. But the definition of disturbing the peace was left intentionally vague. Arguing with neighbours, complaining about prices in the marketplace, or even singing too loudly could result in charges. The punishment was public humiliation in the ducking stool, a device that repeatedly plunged the victim underwater until she nearly drowned, or the scold's bridle, a metal cage locked around the head with a spike that pressed down on the tongue, making speech impossible. The scold's bridle, also known as the branks, represents perhaps the most sadistic expression of Tudor attitudes toward women's speech. This contraption was designed not just to silence women, but to cause excruciating pain whenever they attempted to speak. The metal framework enclosed the entire head with a flat iron piece that pressed against the tongue, and sometimes included spikes or rough surfaces that would lacerate the mouth if the victim tried to talk. Women were forced to wear these devices for hours or even days, paraded through the streets as objects of public ridicule and humiliation. The legal system's obsession with female chastity created another category of laws that turned women's bodies into battlegrounds of social control. The concept of honest fame required women to maintain not just actual chastity, but the appearance of perfect virtue. A woman could be prosecuted for adultery based solely on gossip or suspicion, with no physical evidence required. The testimony of male witnesses carried far more weight than a woman's own protestations of innocence. If found guilty, she faced public whipping, branding with hot irons, or imprisonment in conditions so horrific that many died before completing their sentences. Even unmarried women faced legal persecution for their sexuality through laws governing fornication and bastardy. An unmarried woman who became pregnant could be charged with fornication, facing fines, imprisonment, or public humiliation. Meanwhile, the man responsible faced far lighter penalties, or none at all. If she couldn't pay the fines, she would be whipped publicly, often while pregnant, creating a spectacle designed to shame not just her, but all women who might consider stepping outside prescribed moral boundaries. The economic laws governing women's work reveal another dimension of this systematic oppression. While women were expected to contribute to household economies through various forms of labour, their legal status as non-persons created impossible contradictions. A woman could be held responsible for debts incurred in her trade, but she had no legal standing to collect money owed to her. She could be prosecuted for selling inferior goods, but she couldn't enter into binding contracts to ensure she received quality materials for her work. This legal limbo made it nearly impossible for women to operate successful businesses or achieve any measure of economic independence. The inheritance laws of Tudor England reveal perhaps the most calculated cruelty of this legal system. Under the principle of primogeniture, property passed to the eldest male heir, leaving daughters with nothing unless specifically provided for in a will. But even when fathers attempted to leave property to their daughters, the law found ways to strip women of their inheritance. A daughter who married without her father's consent could be disinherited entirely. A widow who remarried forfeited her dower rights, the small portion of her husband's estate she was legally entitled to for survival. This created a horrifying trap where women faced destitution, whether they remained unmarried and vulnerable, or remarried and lost their only source of income. The legal treatment of rape in Tudor England demonstrates how thoroughly the law viewed women as property rather than people. Rape was prosecuted not as a crime against the woman herself, but as a crime against the man who owned her. The legal term raptus encompassed both sexual assault and abduction, treating the violation of a woman's body as equivalent to theft of property. If an unmarried woman was raped, the crime was against her father. If married, it was against her husband. The woman herself had no legal standing to bring charges or seek justice. Even more horrifying, if a rape victim later married her attacker, the crime was considered resolved, as the property had simply changed hands through irregular means. The punishment for rape varied dramatically based on the social status of both victim and perpetrator. A nobleman who raped a peasant woman might face minimal consequences, perhaps a small fine paid to her father or husband, but a poor man who assaulted a woman of higher social standing faced execution. This wasn't justice, but a protection of property values, ensuring that women of the upper classes maintained their worth as marriage commodities, while treating lower-class women as essentially disposable. Tudor England's witchcraft laws created another avenue for the systematic persecution of women who dared to step outside prescribed roles. The Witchcraft Act of 1563 made practicing witchcraft a felony punishable by death, but the definition of witchcraft was so broad that virtually any woman could be accused. Midwives who delivered stillborn babies, healers whose patients died despite treatment, elderly women who lived alone and kept cats, even women who simply argued with neighbors who later fell ill, all could find themselves facing charges of supernatural maleficence. The legal proceedings in witchcraft cases abandoned even the pretense of justice. Testimony from children was accepted without question. Evidence could include dreams, visions, or the unexplained death of livestock. Physical examinations searched for devil's marks, any unusual mole or birthmark that could be interpreted as proof of supernatural compact. Women accused of witchcraft faced torture designed to extract confessions, with the understanding that refusing to confess was itself evidence of demonic possession. The logic was circular and inescapable, a legal maze designed to ensure conviction regardless of innocence. The marriage laws themselves reveal how thoroughly Tudor society viewed women as commodities to be traded between men. Arranged marriages were not just common, but legally enforceable. A father could promise his daughter in marriage while she was still a child, and she would be legally bound to honor that contract upon reaching marriageable age. Refusal to marry the chosen husband could result in imprisonment, disinheritance, or worse. The concept of consent existed only as a formality, a legal fiction that allowed society to pretend women had some agency in determining their fate. Even within marriage, women faced laws that would be recognizable today as legalized domestic abuse. The doctrine of reasonable chastisement gave husbands the legal right to physically punish their wives for any perceived misbehavior. The only restriction was that the instrument used couldn't be thicker than a man's thumb, giving rise to the expression rule of thumb. This wasn't a safeguard for women, but a property protection law, ensuring that husbands didn't damage their own assets beyond repair. The religious reforms of the Tudor period created new opportunities for female persecution under the guise of spiritual purity. Protestant theology emphasized the sinful nature of womankind, tracing social problems to Eve's original disobedience. This theological framework provided intellectual justification for laws that treated women as inherently corrupt and dangerous. Women were banned from reading scripture aloud, teaching religious doctrine, or participating in church governance. They were expected to remain silent in religious gatherings, their spiritual salvation dependent entirely on male interpretation and guidance. As our Tudor woman finally reaches her home after her terrifying journey through London's streets, she faces the ultimate irony of her existence. The bread she carries, purchased with money that isn't legally hers, will feed a family in which she has no legal standing. The children she bore and raised belong to their father by law. The house she maintains and the income she generates through her labour are property of a husband who could legally sell them without her consent. She exists in a state of legal non-existence, a ghost in her own life, surrounded by laws designed to ensure she remains forever powerless. The horrific laws of Tudor England weren't aberrations or accidents of history. They were the systematic codification of a worldview that saw women as inherently inferior, dangerous, and in need of constant control. Every aspect of female existence, from speech to sexuality, from work to worship, was regulated by statutes that treated women as problems to be solved rather than people to be protected. These laws didn't just restrict women's freedom, they denied their very humanity, creating a legal framework that would echo through centuries of English law and influence legal systems around the world. Understanding these laws isn't just an exercise in historical curiosity. It's a reminder of how quickly rights can be stripped away and how vigilant we must remain in protecting the freedoms that previous generations fought so hard to secure. The Tudor woman hurrying through London's streets may seem like a figure from the distant past, but her struggle for dignity, agency, and basic human recognition remains painfully relevant today. Her story reminds us that the law can be either a shield protecting the vulnerable or a weapon wielded by the powerful, and the choice between these possibilities remains ours to make.